Welcome back, seekers to Spirits in the Shadow. Tonight, we open our files on two chillingly true accounts from Asia's most haunted hospitals. First, we journey to a derelict hospital in Thailand, where the spectral figure of a nurse is still seen walking the deserted halls, searching for her final patient. Then, we fly to the Philippines to uncover the terrifying secret of room 404 and its cursed bed, a place from which no one has ever checked out alive. What connects these two tales of terror? Subscribe now as we dare to unlock the doors to both. Story 1. Thailand, the Cursed Hospital. In the heart of Asia, a hospital is more than just a place of healing. It is a vessel of memories, a container for the first and last breaths, for the tears of sorrow and the final cries of life. There is a deeply rooted belief that when such a place is abandoned, the spirits of those who once lay within its walls do not depart. They remain, tethered to the echoes of their final moments. The first story begins in Thailand, at a hospital known only as the Home of Forgotten Souls. It was the relentless humidity of central Thailand that hit them first. 5 university students from Bangkok, a tight-knit group united by a thirst for adrenaline and a growing social media following. Their purpose was simple: urban exploration, or urbex, capturing the beauty in decay for their popular online channel. For them, this was more than a hobby. It was a brand. The group consisted of Art, the charismatic leader; Bank, the quiet observer with the camera; Golf, the loud skeptic; and 2 young women, the ever-enthusiastic Far and the more reserved Ploy. Their current base was a small town an hour outside of the capital, a place of vibrant street markets and the constant hum of scooters. The perfect, authentic backdrop for their adventures. Their days were spent scouting locations, their cameras a permanent fixture. They documented crumbling temples and grand colonial houses, building a portfolio of aesthetically pleasing decay. They felt at ease here, just another group of young adventurers. The locals were friendly, their smiles genuine. Even if their English was limited, they felt safe, anonymous, and a million miles away from the pressures of university life. This could have been anyone's weekend thrill-seeking trip. Their research led them to a local legend, an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of the province, a sprawling concrete complex that had been empty for decades. Online forums and whispered local rumors spoke of it in hushed tones, a place where the air was heavy with more than just moisture. For Art, it was the perfect subject, a location guaranteed to boost their views. The warnings were subtle at first. A guest house owner who suddenly forgot his English when Art mentioned the hospital's name, a tuk-tuk driver who simply shook his head and drove away. But the group was driven by the creator's singular focus, the desire to film what others chose to ignore. They dismissed it as local superstition, the kind of folklore that made for a good story but held no real weight. They were just content creators chasing a viral video. The thought that some places are left alone for a reason never once crossed their minds. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, as the 5 students arrived at the skeletal remains of what was once a bustling hospital. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a youthful sense of invincibility, they were urban explorers on a quest for a thrill, ready to document their adventure in the derelict building that had been shuttered for over 2 decades. The main doors had been torn from their hinges, leaving a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the last vestiges of daylight. As they stepped across the threshold, their laughter and playful banter echoed through the cavernous, silent halls, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere that was beginning to settle around them. They moved deeper into the labyrinth of decay, their initial excitement blinding them to the subtle wrongness of the place. But as the darkness grew, so did a palpable sense of being watched, a silent pressure that began to suffocate their lightheartedness. Their first taste of the uncanny came when Art's powerful flashlight, fitted with fresh batteries just hours before, began to flicker erratically. The beam of light, which had been cutting a sharp, steady path through the gloom, sputtered and died, plunging them into absolute disorienting blackness for a full 3 seconds. A sharp gasp escaped Farr's lips. In that brief moment, the oppressive weight of the hospital felt total. Then, the light returned, albeit weaker than before. "Cheap batteries," Golf scoffed, his voice a little too quick to fill the void. "You get what you pay for, man." Art smacked the side of the flashlight. "Should be fine now." The others chuckled nervously, the simple explanation a comforting balm against the sudden, primal fear of the dark. They were in an old, decaying building. Of course, there would be quirks and minor equipment failures. But as Art fiddled with the switch, a cold knot of apprehension tightened in the pit of the audience's stomach. It wasn't just a flicker. It was a deliberate, almost taunting interruption. This was the hospital's first whisper, a gentle but firm reminder that they were unwelcome intruders in a place that had long since surrendered to something other than the passage of time. The wavering light served as a stark visual metaphor for their own fleeting confidence, a beacon of their vulnerability in the face of the unknown. A few corridors later, as they navigated a ward filled with the metallic scent of rust and decay, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached Farr's ears. It was a soft, rhythmic creaking, like a rocking chair in gentle, steady motion. She paused, her head tilted, and motioned for the others to be quiet. "Did you guys hear that?" she whispered. They all stood still, their breath held captive in their chests, the beams of their lights freezing on overturned gurneys and stained mattresses. The sound was gone, probably just the wind. Bank rationalized, his voice a little too loud in the sudden silence. "This place is full of broken windows." He was right, of course. The wind sighed through the shattered panes, creating a symphony of mournful groans and whistles. The explanation was logical, and the group readily accepted it, eager to dismiss anything that might validate the growing unease. For the viewers, however, the sound was a clear and ominous sign. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate to be the random play of the wind. It was the sound of something waiting, something patient, and its brief appearance was a carefully curated hint of the presence that lurked just beyond their perception. The seed of true fear had been planted, and it was beginning to take root in the fertile ground of their imaginations. As they ventured into what appeared to be the pediatric wing, where faded cartoon murals of smiling animals were peeling from the walls, Ploy noticed it. On a mattress covered in a thick layer of grime and fallen plaster sat a single, pristine, white teddy bear. Its plastic eyes seemed to gleam in the sweeping beams of their flashlights. "That's odd," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. The bear was immaculate, its fur untouched by the filth and decay that surrounded it. It looked as if it had been placed there only moments ago. "Maybe another group of explorers left it here," Art suggested, ever the pragmatist, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "You know, as a kind of creepy calling card." The explanation seemed plausible enough, and they moved on, though Ploy couldn't shake the image of those shiny, vacant eyes. The audience, however, understood the deeper implication. The pristine bear was not a random prop. It was a deliberate placement, a sign that they were not alone in their exploration. It was a silent testament to an unseen hand, a presence that was not only aware of them, but was also toying with them, leaving breadcrumbs of dread for them to follow into the heart of the hospital's darkness. The further they delved into the hospital's decaying heart, the more the temperature seemed to plummet. A biting, unnatural chill seeped into their bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the evening air. It felt heavy and damp, clinging to their clothes and skin. Their breath began to fog in front of them in thick, white plumes. "Damn, it's freezing in here," Golf chattered, rubbing his arms vigorously. Must be some kind of weird draft from a basement or something. They huddled closer together, their flashlights now seeming to generate more comfort than actual light. They rationalized the cold as a natural phenomenon, a quirk of the building's dilapidated state. But for those watching, this was the most visceral warning yet. The sudden, localized drop in temperature is a classic hallmark of a paranormal presence, a clear sign that something was drawing energy from the environment. It was the hospital itself exhaling a frigid breath, a tangible manifestation of the malevolence that had been patiently observing them from the moment they had dared to cross its threshold. The laughter had long since died, replaced by a tense, watchful silence, as the 5 students finally began to understand that they were not just exploring a building, they were trespassing in a tomb. The rot of the old infirmary was a physical presence, a weight in the air that clung to their clothes and filled their lungs. The group had been documenting the decay for their channel, but the place was beginning to feel less abandoned and more expectant. It started with a photograph. Bank, aiming his camera down the suffocating length of the 3rd-floor corridor, captured something his eyes had missed. On the small digital screen, a figure stood stark against the gloom at the far end. A woman, her form lost in a white hospital gown, with a cascade of long, dark hair obscuring her features. Art called out, and they aimed their flashlights, cutting sharp, sterile beams through the darkness. The corridor was empty. There was nothing there but peeling paint and the silence of the dead. But the silence didn't last. At first, they dismissed the sounds as the groans of a dying building. A faint, metallic clink from an unseen room. The whisper of a loose floor tile. Yet, the sounds began to repeat, growing bolder, weaving a pattern of dread in the cold night air. The clinking became sharper, more rhythmic, like surgical instruments being laid out on a steel tray. A soft, squeaking friction started, the unmistakable sound of a gurney's wheel turning slowly, somewhere just beyond their sight. Each time Far would stop, holding her breath to listen, the others would give her a look. "It's just the wind," Golf would say, his voice a little too loud. "This place is just getting to you." She felt a chill of isolation creep over her that was colder than any draft in that derelict hall. She was hearing a story no one else could, a prelude to a nightmare only she was witnessing. The intensity peaked when a new sound joined the ghostly chorus. It was faint at first, easily mistaken for the whine of wind through a broken window pane, but it grew steadily in pitch and despair. A baby's cry. The sound was a magnet, pulling the group forward against their better judgment, down corridors that seemed to narrow behind them. It led them to the old maternity ward, a place of profound sorrow, filled with the skeletons of broken cribs. The air grew impossibly cold, and the crying became a desperate, heartbreaking wail. And then they saw her. She stood at the far end of the room, a static silhouette against the grimy window. It was the woman from the photograph. Her head was bowed over a single, miraculously intact crib from which the cries emanated. As they watched, frozen, she slowly lifted her head. Her face was a pale, emotionless mask, but her eyes were pits of absolute blackness, hollowed-out voids that seemed to swallow the very light from their flashlights. The baby's cry, already fraught with terror, twisted and sharpened into an unholy, piercing shriek that was no longer human. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. That scream shattered their paralysis. They didn't think, they didn't speak, they ran, and they never ever looked back. The oppressive silence of the 4th floor shattered. It began not with a bang, but with a whimper, a sound so faint it could have been the wind. Then another joined it, and another, until the air was thick with the sound of phantom infants. From the far end of the corridor, where the shadows clung like damp velvet, a figure began to resolve itself from the gloom. It was small, childlike, but its form wavered, glitching in and out of existence like a corrupted video file. Its eyes were hollow voids of static, and as its mouth opened, the cacophony of cries intensified, coalescing into a single deafening shriek that clawed at their ears. Panic, raw and absolute, seized them. They turned and fled. Their panicked flight down the decaying staircase became a frantic stampede, their footsteps echoing like gunshots in the enclosed space. The concrete stairs trembled under their combined weight as they descended into madness, each step a desperate prayer for escape. Behind them, the wails of the spectral children morphed into a horrifying chorus, a symphony of suffering that seemed to chase them, nipping at their heels with icy tendrils of fear. The sound was no longer just in the air. It was inside their heads, a relentless, piercing scream that vibrated through their very bones. They didn't dare look back, for fear of what they might see, of the ghostly procession that their mind's eye could already vividly paint. They burst through the hospital's main doors and into the humid night, gasping for air, their lungs burning. In the pale glow of the streetlights, their faces were masks of terror, chalk white and streaked with sweat. They were a tableau of silent screams and wide, unblinking eyes, each of them locked in their own private nightmare. The aftermath was a blur of ragged breaths and trembling hands. It wasn't until later, huddled together in the relative safety of a parked car, that they dared to review the footage. What they saw chilled them to the core. The video was a chaotic mess of distorted images and jarring static, the audio a maelstrom of unintelligible noise. But amidst the chaos, a single, clear voice emerged. It was a whisper, soft and melodic, in a language none of them understood. But the universal plea was undeniable. A quick search on their phones confirmed their fears. It was Thai. The disembodied voice plaintively whispered, "Don't leave me here." The story of their ordeal spread like wildfire through the city's online forums and social media groups. Another log on the roaring fire of the hospital's dark legend. Their distorted footage, with its chilling audio, became the centerpiece of a new wave of fascination and fear. The authorities, citing safety concerns, once again sealed the hospital, its secrets and its sorrows locked away behind chains and barbed wire. But the group knew the truth. They knew what they had heard, what they had felt, and they knew that they would never, ever go back. If you've ever had a brush with the unexplained, share your story in the comments below. And if you want to see more investigations into the dark and the unknown, don't forget to subscribe. You never know what we might find next. Story: Philippines, the nurse who returned. The second story comes from the Philippines. It speaks of a place where memories linger like a persistent fever, and of a nurse named Lorna who went back, chasing the ghosts of her past. Lorna had spent the better part of a decade within the walls of St. Vincent's General Hospital. They were her formative years as a nurse, a time of frantic energy, profound sadness, and overwhelming joy. When the hospital was decommissioned, relocating to a newer, more modern facility, a part of Lorna's history was sealed behind its locked doors. Years later, driven by a nostalgic curiosity she couldn't quite explain, she convinced a few friends to accompany her on an unauthorized trip back. She wanted to walk those familiar corridors one last time, to see the rooms where she had comforted the dying and welcomed new life. Armed with flashlights and a portable Bluetooth speaker, the group slipped through a gap in the perimeter fence. The air inside was thick and still, heavy with the scent of dust and decay. Yet for Lorna, it was intoxicating. "This was the pediatric ward," she'd say, her voice echoing in the empty space, her flashlight beam dancing across faded murals of cartoon animals. Her friends, caught up in the thrill of the illicit adventure, laughed and joked, their cheerful voices a stark contrast to the oppressive silence. They played music from the speaker, a pop song that felt alien and intrusive in the solemn environment. The sound bounced off the peeling paint and shattered linoleum, a fleeting attempt to breathe life back into a place long dead. As they ventured deeper, moving towards the old surgical wing, the laughter began to fade. The atmosphere grew heavier, colder. Lorna felt a prickling on her skin, the ingrained sense of being watched that every night shift nurse learns to recognize. Her friends felt it too, their jokes dying on their lips. They rounded a corner, their flashlight beams converging on a lone wheelchair sitting in the middle of the hallway. It was rusted and worn, a relic of a bygone era. As they watched, held breathless by a sudden collective fear, the wheelchair began to move. It didn't roll as if pushed by a breeze, but turned slowly, deliberately, as if an unseen patient was adjusting their position. A nervous shriek escaped one of her friends. At that exact moment, the music from the Bluetooth speaker cut out, replaced by a harsh, crackling static. The friends fumbled with the device, but the static only intensified before it coalesced into a sound that made Lorna's blood run cold. It was a crisp, rhythmic, electronic beep. Beep, beep, beep. It was the unmistakable sound of a cardiac monitor. It was a sound she had associated with life, with struggle, with a delicate thread between existence and oblivion. Here, in this powerless, forgotten place, it was a sound that defied all logic. As the steady, phantom pulse filled the suffocating silence of the corridor, Lorna knew. Her friends heard a scary noise. She heard a vital sign. She understood that they hadn't come to an empty building. They had walked into a room that was still occupied. The laughter was gone, the curiosity replaced by a primal terror. Lorna knew this place was never empty. A suffocating darkness had long festered within the walls of St. Vincent's General Hospital, a history far more sinister than any ghost story could capture. In the early 1940s, its pediatric ward was run by the esteemed Dr. Mateo Castillo, a man celebrated for his philanthropic work with the city's underprivileged children. This public persona, however, was a carefully constructed facade for a monstrous reality. Castillo was a man obsessed with medical notoriety, secretly conducting unsanctioned and horrific experiments on his most vulnerable patients. His pediatric ward was not a place of healing, but a private laboratory. He would admit children from impoverished families, offering them free, radical treatments that were a godsend to their desperate parents. Weeks later, he would deliver the tragic news of a sudden, inexplicable decline. The grieving families never saw their children's bodies, told it was a necessary quarantine measure to prevent a non-existent outbreak. In truth, Castillo was covering his tracks. The children who died from his unethical procedures, and all of them did, were disposed of in the most horrific way imaginable, encased in the wet concrete of the hospital's new wing foundations during its construction. Their fates, sealed in darkness and terror, became eternally bound to the place of their torment, unable to move on, unable to escape. The team burst through a set of double doors and into the cool, liberating night air, collapsing onto the dew-slicked grass. The cacophony of disembodied wails and phantom footsteps vanished the instant the doors swung shut, replaced by an almost unnervingly profound silence. As they gasped for breath, trying to calm their racing hearts, a stooped elderly man stepped out from the deep shadows of a nearby weeping willow. He was Mangberto, the hospital's long-serving night watchman, a man who had silently patrolled these grounds for over 50 years. His own younger sister, Elena, had been one of the last children to die under Dr. Castillo's care. Driven by a lifetime of suspicion and quiet investigation, Mangberto had become the unwilling keeper of the hospital's secrets. He approached the shaken group, his face a road map of sorrow and resolve. From the inside pocket of his worn coat, He carefully extracted a small, tattered notebook. "You've seen them," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "The children." It was a nurse's diary from 1945, which Mangberto had found years ago sealed within a wall. In frantic, terrified script, the nurse detailed her growing horror at Dr. Castillo's practices, the children who never seemed to get better, the strange nightly procedures, and the chilling silence that followed. The final entry described her discovery of his gruesome ledger, filled with names and dates, before she disappeared herself. Suddenly, every horrifying, inexplicable detail of their ordeal slammed into place with sickening clarity. The looping corridors were not a trick of their minds, but a psychic manifestation of the children's eternal, confused search for a way out of their nightmare. The overwhelming chorus of crying children they had heard in the pediatric ward was not a residual haunting, but the raw, perpetual agony of dozens of trapped souls. The small, shrouded figures in the beds were not mere apparitions, but spiritual imprints of their final, terrified moments, forced to relive their deaths on an endless loop. The child who sat up, its eyes a bottomless, empty void, was a desperate, primal scream for help from a soul in unimaginable pain. The fleeting cold spots, the malfunctioning equipment, it was all the chaotic, powerful energy of these lost spirits bleeding into the physical world. And Lorna's final chilling vision of the faces in the windows was the most devastating revelation of all. They weren't spectres of malice watching them leave. They were a silent, pleading audience of the damned, forever imprisoned, their faces pressed against the glass, watching a world they were stolen from. The profound silence that fell the moment they stepped outside wasn't peace. It was the invisible wall of their prison. They hadn't just escaped a haunted building. They had stumbled out of a mass grave. What do you think lingers in the silent, empty halls of a place built on the threshold of life and death? In Thailand, they speak of Phai Tai Hong, the spirits of those who died violently or unexpectedly, their souls unable to find peace. Across the sea, in the Philippines, they are known as multo, lost souls wandering the earth, yearning to be remembered by the living. These aren't just ghost stories, they are cultural echoes of how we perceive life, death, and what might lie beyond. Hospitals, by their very nature, become unintentional reservoirs of these powerful emotions: joy, sorrow, pain, and relief. The walls absorb the spectral energy of every life that began and every soul that departed within them. They are never truly empty. The lingering presence felt in a deserted ward or a silent operating theatre is a testament to the countless stories that unfolded there. So, we ask you again, would you dare to enter one? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe so you don't miss the next haunting tale from Spirits in the Shadow.